customers of restaurants that's appeared on Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. What was the food actually like before and after the show helped the restaurant? Live in Denver, where a pizzeria called Pantaleon's that was on the show is located. I have eaten there off and on for almost 25 years, believe it or not. The pizza was always good, very expensive and often unavailable because of the odd hours and habits of the owner. The owner is a cantankerous guy that seems not to care much about what his customers think of his place. After the show, you can see that the menu is more standardized, but honestly I see no change in the place. I'm honestly curious how he keeps the place open sometimes. If he just hired a delivery person and gave two shits about customer service, this place would probably dominate the neighborhood. The Mad Cactus was on an episode, and it was so disgusting even long-time customers were turned off. It was open for about 28 years, but it was so dirty on TV, and you know they cleaned like crazy before they appeared on TV, and it was still so bad no one wanted to ever go back. It is currently a Christmas tree lot, and I don't think many people care anymore. I only miss the margarita nights. If anyone had not seen the Mad Cactus episode of Kitchen Nightmares, I would suggest it. It wasn't Kitchen Nightmares, but Restaurant Impossible. I never thought the food was bad before. It was just your average diner with average food. Certain things were better than others. Their problem was they had a huge menu, 300 items, so a lot of stuff was frozen because it wasn't used often. The show came in, yelled at them, stripped down their menu so the food would be fresh, and totally remodeled the building. I think I went there twice afterwards. The food was a little better, but not significantly. The remodel was kinda strange. By the second time I went, the menu had doubled in size. Not as big as previously, but bigger than it should have been. They retired very shortly after that, claiming they'd lost the connection with the restaurant after the show. Can't speak to before, but I can speak to after. Years ago, during a trip to the UK, I decided to go to the Fenwick Arms because it was the most commonly rerun episode on BBC America, and British gravy sounds awesome. Unfortunately, by then they'd closed, but Brian and Elaine, the owners, had simply hopped from Lancashire to Yorkshire and opened a new restaurant called The Ship Inn. I had the roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, gravy, and buttered vegetables, along with a pint of some local beer. It was, bar none, the best meal I had the entire trip. Definitely worth going out of your way for. I actually had my rehearsal dinner at Leon's in Montclair, New Jersey in 2012. Their episode was on TV about a year earlier, but I don't know when he was actually there. We obviously watched the show before we booked. The problems on the show seemed to be management related, as well as the classic 2 billion items on the menu he seems to encounter every episode. I cannot speak highly enough about they handled the rehearsal dinner. The food was great, though to be fair, good Italian food in a setting like that in North Jersey is not hard to come by, but the service, especially the attentiveness of the manager, could not have been better. I can't speak to how it was before other than what I saw on the show, but if that was accurate, then Gordon whipped the guy and the establishment into shape. 10/10ths also, my review was from October 2012. Their website looks pretty nice now. That can be telling of how they care about their business. I live near Capri and have dined there pre and post Kitchen Nightmares. The restaurant was featured on season 4, episode 10. Before the show, it was dingy, dusty, and in dire need of redecoration. It was exactly as it looked on the show. We have restaurant letter grades in Los Angeles, and it was rated B at the time. You have to make a concerted effort to be filthy to earn a C. The food was meh. The Caesar salad was pale and sad. Then came Kitchen Nightmares, and honestly, yes, the place turned around. It's not the best pizza in the neighborhood, but it's nice, and yes, the garlic knots are tasty. They are still going strong. I was on the Park's Edge episode in Atlanta on the before night. Dinner was free because everything got sent back, but our bar tab was $100 for just my wife and I. We are visible in a couple scenes too. That one was an inept management episode rather than a dirty kitchen episode, but it still closed a few months after taping. I live in Hampton, a neighborhood in Baltimore. Ramsay filmed at Cafe Hon, a Baltimore Hon themed restaurant. complete with cat eye glasses, beehive haircuts, Elvis statues, and anything else you might find from the musical Hairspray. The food has always sucked. After the show aired, it still sucks. There's a giant pink flamingo on the side of the building, though, so the tourists think it's quirky and like, so Baltimore. It's a depressing, tragic display of kitsch, false charm and manufactured quaint. The owner once trademarked, "Thank you, netizen," the word hon, which had been part of the Baltimore dialect for decades. She also had a gift shop nearby, hometown, that closed. Good riddance. There's tons of great food in the neighborhood, and all the locals know it. The tourists go to the place with the big flamingo. A restaurant around where I grew up, rural NJ, was featured a few years back. I think it was called Flamingus. It was an outdated tropical themed place, very odd for that local with mediocre food, but Ramsey changed it into a sports bar with some higher end dishes. It did fairly well for a while due to the publicity, but it has since been reopened and remodeled by new owners, I think, and the food is pretty good. A family friend's restaurant wasn't on Ramsey's show, but on the other one with a similar theme, Restaurant Impossible I think. It was a family-owned Italian place. The food was really good when I was younger, but the husband died, and the wife got older, and struggled to keep it up to the same standards. Eventually one of the kids moved back to help out, but he had zero experience, and couldn't do much. This is around when the show came in. Show came. Some increase in quality of food. The food was never bad. The biggest changes by far was the decor and stuff. But basically everything reverted back to how it was. The town is small and filled with old people, since no one young would really want to live there, and they didn't really want the place to change. The biggest problem with the place was, and continues to be, that the customer base in the area is simply dying out with no infusion of new people. The show was never going to be able to help much. On phone, so sorry for typos. I worked in a small ski town in France and it only had 2 bar/restaurants. Both were owned by a guy who featured on Ramsey's Costa del Nightmares. I think he was more on the show because his businesses were hemorrhaging money rather than bad food, but he was a very well-known character in the town. He was a really nice guy, just also batshit crazy to the maximum, which made it all the more hilarious every time you were in there drinking or eating. Food was awesome though, so props where it's due. A few years back, an inn from my hometown was featured on Hotel Hell. It was owned by a really snooty couple who were notorious for barely paying their employees and collecting tacky art and antiques. Personally, I had a few interactions with these guys when they briefly owned a small cafe in town about a decade ago where I once played what had been advertised as an open mic, only to arrive to find no MC or PA system. Basically, the dudes wanted free quiet dining music for their very few dinner guests. Weak tea, but par for the course. Anyway, Ramsey did an episode where he not only exposed the fact that their staff were being exploited and their garbage antiques and tacky collectibles weren't worth jack shit, but also illustrated how their room smelled like garbage. Neither of the owners had any business sense yet felt that they were better than the locals, and, shockingly, the local consensus was that they were total pricks who should be avoided at best. Fast forward a few months, the inn's dining room has been redesigned and is now local friendly. I go once. It's alright. Harpoon bottles at an average price. The local bar was closed at the time, so my friends and I were down to check it out a few times. As soon as our regular watering hole reopened in its far more convenient location, and with drafts. I don't think any of us went back there. Last I heard, the inn had closed down and sold. Can't help but think it's for the best. A restaurant in my town wasn't on Kitchen Nightmares, but it was on Restaurant Impossible. The wagon wheel had been here for decades before Robert Irvine stepped in. The restaurant itself was dark and greasy. The walls, the floor, the tables, everything was greasy to the touch, and the staple on the menu was fried muskrat. I couldn't even look at it. My grandfather once ordered it, and it came out on a plate, head and all. Safe to say, the food was bad. After the show ended, the food was still crap. They refused to remove the muskrat from the menu and went back to their previous ways before Irvine tried to help. So, they closed down and the restaurant got bulldozed to the ground. Now it's a used car sales lot. I've been to Zacalo and Chirella's, which are both in Philly. I was in grad school at the time and my boyfriend and I stumbled into Zacalo post kitchen nightmares since it was close to our school, but we deliberately sought out Chirella's out of curiosity. I think we discovered kitchen nightmares from a small sign in the front door of Zacalo about Gordon Ramsay's visit. I had been into Hell's Kitchen a few years before, but discovered KN thanks to that. Zacalo had awesome margaritas and some good appetizers. The food was pretty good, but for a Mexican restaurant it lacked a little spice. Chirella's food was actually really good. Great pasta, dessert, and meat. I specifically loving the spaghetti and meatballs, even though I usually don't dig that stuff. I felt a little awkward going there, since the family drama was pretty intense in that episode. We tried to get to the Hot Potato, a place that mostly served baked potatoes, but it closed before we could get there.